Okay, guys. This morning I wanted to do a brief um, uh, outline of how to integrate with. Let me see if I can get my video up here. One sec. There we go. I wanted to do a brief overview of how to integrate Stripe with a Flutter app. There are a few ways you can do this. There's actually a Dart library that provides some Stripe integration. The Dart library didn't do everything that I needed to do. But on a previous video, we went through developing a checkout screen, and I've added some more features to that checkout screen, and I'll do another video on that, as well as the integration with what we're going to discuss today. But basically, this is going to be a project walkthrough or overview. It's not going to be a code along, but I hope that it is some value to you and that you can get some ideas from this. The code will be publicly available, and I'll put a link to it in the description. But what we're going to do today is we're going to look at integrating with Stripe. And it's a generic integration, but this integration was made to be integrated with a Flutter app. And the things that we're going to do are we're going to learn how to create a customer object. So new customer, we've got a function in there to query for a customer based on email, I think. And then we've got how to create a payment method, how to attach a payment method, and then we've got, I think in this, I need to look, but we've got a method that will do a few of those things at the same time, so you don't need to make subsequent methods. So there's one that's kind of a combination, so you can make one request and get your transaction completed. So I wanted to just, on the screen here, I've got a few resources. One is the Stripe API documentation, and to look at how to create a customer object, it really helps to look at the documentation. It will show you like, hey, the address is optional, the phone is optional, a good deal of the customer object is optional. And then if we go over here, we can look at, I'm going to expand this, but went over there, but we can see that they've got some sample node code here, and it looks like the description, even though it's optional, they've put a description here, and then it will actually show you the response that's generated, so that you can know how to process that response in your app. Real quickly, you can switch this to go to curl, and if you want to test this on the command line. And then you can also, if you're more familiar with Java, you can look at how their Java library works, or their Java library and their Java API. But we're going to look at Node because that's kind of what we're following for this integration. So this is the Stripe API documentation. Another key resource as you're doing a development is the Stripe dashboard. So you can see here we've generated actually some subscriptions here at a previous time, and we've got our customers here. So this is something you can see I've created a lot of customers while testing, but you're able to see the customers you create, and if you click into them, you can view the data, the billing information associated with them, as well as their ID. The Stripe API is nice in the sense that the objects that you create, typically the ID of them contains something that is related to the type of object that it is associated with. And then you can see here I've put some details here as part of the API, and I'm using the Stripe test card. Okay, so that's this piece. We've looked at the API documentation and the dashboard. The next thing let's look at is I put some code on GitHub that is basically the crux of what we're going to be discussing today. It's under my account. It's Dazzle 5000 and Stripe Cloud Functions. But I wanted to look at it in Android Studio because that's what I typically work in. I know that it's not suited for TypeScript development, but that's okay. It still works. So now I'm just going to go through the functions and how they work, and then also I didn't mention this earlier, but these are Firebase Cloud Functions. So the code that we're developing here, or we're looking at here, is meant to be hosted in Firebase or Google Cloud as Cloud Functions, and that they're actually HTTP Cloud Functions, so they can be invoked just using HTTP commands. Which, because of that, you don't need to have whatever talks to this doesn't need to talk to it through a Firebase wrapper or a Firebase library. We can use arbitrary, we could use curl probably if we wanted to. So the first thing we've got up here is we've got we're importing our Firebase functions. I don't know why. Okay, we've got admin, and that's to initialize the admin app, or initialize the app. And then we've got we're importing the Stripe library, and here will be your actual key. So, this is where if you were to use this project, you would want to put your actual Stripe test key. That's something that you can find in the dashboard. And then we've got this course here, and this is what we're going to use. That's going to allow our requests to be processed, even though they're not coming from a the domain that's associated with our Firebase project. You might not need this. I needed this based on my configuration. So the first thing that I have here is a get customer function, and we can see it's an HTTPS cloud or Firebase cloud function, and we wrap it in this cores function. And what we do here is we make a call to the Stripe library and the customers API, and then the list API, which is basically a query, and we pass in the email that is coming in from our request body. And what that's going to do is it's just going to call our Stripe project and look for a customer with the email that we've passed in. And there's a concept of the Firebase shell, which allows you to test it. And if you were to run this in the Firebase shell, this would be a sample command. And so what we do here is we make this request to the Firebase library, and if we get a customer, then we send that customer object back with the response of response 200. And if we don't get a customer, then we log an error, and then we call report error, which right now just logs another error, but it used to log to a Google stack driver. And I'm sorry if you can hear someone weed eating out. So the next thing that we've got here is a create payment method. But actually before that, let's look at this. We've got to create customer. I thought I had a blank create customer, but we don't right now. So let's actually go to create payment method, because this might help. This might be a little bit smaller. So the next thing we've got here is we've got a create payment method. And what this will be is like, we want to create a credit card as a payment method. So it's a very similar layout. We are creating a function called create payment method. That's going to be hosted in our Firebase project. And we're going to take the request body that we get in, and we're going to parse it because it's going to be a JSON request. And we're going to assign that to the data object. And then we're going to then call the Stripe library, the payment methods library, and we're going to say it's a type card, and then we're going to pass in the card details in this object. And these card details are coming from this parsed data object that we had earlier. This should actually probably be card, but I copied this code from the customer function, and so it says customer. So we could actually change that right now, and this would need to be card 2. So this is going to say if we get an error, we're going to pass in a function, and it's going to give us back an error or a card. And if we get a card, then we're going to send that card response back. If not, we're going to send the response code from the error, the status code, I should say, of the error, and then the message that comes from the error. And this will allow us to debug it. Like maybe it's going to tell us like our expiration date is incorrect. And the client can look at that and say, okay, this was an invalid request. Here's the message, invalid expiration date. So one of the projects that I was using this on, this is where we're going to get into project specific stuff. We were creating a checkout for a subscription product, and so we needed to create a method for creating a subscription. And what that'll take is a few things, and I've kind of outlined, let's see here. This was something that I had previously done, and this doesn't follow the right now this is a helper method. So we're not going to look at this because we're going to look at the method below it, because this is a method that's called by the function below it. So when I initially developed this, I had these functions where we're going to create a customer, we're going to create a payment method, we're going to create a subscription with those details, or then we're going to attach the payment method to the customer, and then we're going to create a subscription with these details. And that was a very slow integration because each request was distinct. And Firebase Cloud Functions, while they're fairly performant, they kind of have this like cold and warm scenario, and that was just taking a little bit too much time. So I decided to combine some of those steps, and this is one of the combinations. So I've got a function here called create customer and subscription, and what we're going to pass it is our customer details, and then once that is successful, we're going to, or if that's successful, then we're going to create a subscription with that customer. And so the request is going to include the customer details, the payment method, and then if that's successful, it's going to create a subscription using the helper function above it. So here's our call to create customer, which we saw earlier. It's assumed that the payment method has already successfully been created, and that the client that's calling this is going to pass in that payment method, which is just an ID. And so when we call customer create with their details and their payment method, it automatically attaches that payment method and makes it the default payment for the customer. And then we can see that we pass in a handler for the response. And so if that's successful and we have a customer, we're going to create a subscription, and we're going to pass in that, we're going to pass through our request and our response so that we can call back. And then we're going to pass in the customer ID and then the quantity, which is how much of this they're going to buy. And then we've got our standard error handling that I walked through earlier. So let's look at what create subscription does, which we reference right here. We can see it takes 4 arguments. So create subscription, it's going to go and call the Stripe library, and it's going to call the subscriptions functions on that library to create a subscription with that ID. We've got a hard-coded plan here. This could be passed in if you have multiple types of subscriptions or different products. We're going to take the quantity off there, and here for our subscription we're going to say, instead of charging immediately, we're just going to send an invoice, and then we're going to wait. It's going to basically, the invoice is going to be due in 30 days. And so depending on your business requirements, you might want to charge the customer immediately. You might also want to send an invoice and then have a phone call and just make sure, like, the set up in it. Just depending on your business process, you might want to have different settings. And then here we've got payment intent, which this could really just be subscription here. And I'll update that because that'll be more accurate. And here we've got here. So that we're really checking to see if the subscription was created. And then we're going to log some details for us to help debugging. And then we'll also respond with an error. Now in this project, here's a create subscription function. If you don't want to combine it, and it is the same thing. So if you already had a customer object and you already had a payment method associated with that customer, then you could call this create subscription function, and it wouldn't generate a new customer. And so let's say you have an existing customer, this would be a good use case. You could say, hey, I've got an existing customer, this is their ID, and they want to buy 7 more units of our product. I've also got a attach payment to customer function. So this is if you've created your payment method separately and you've created your customer separately and you want to attach that payment to the customer to make it the default payment. We've got this in here. And then we've got create payment intent. This is something that I was used during testing, but it's not something that I think we're using currently right now, so that's okay. So I'm going to open up in a different screen here the Firebase project and just show you what this looks like in the Firebase console. And then I'll probably have another video that shows how this integrates with the Flutter checkout, and then show it working in real life. But this is kind of an overview of the cloud functions. So if we go over, I'm just opening my Firebase project, and I've got a bunch, so I wanted to do it over here. So if we go to our Firebase cloud functions, so let's say we've developed all this code and we want to get it on the web. So what we would do is, if we've already initialized our project here, we just do Firebase deploy, and that's going to run through some test commands, make sure our project has good syntax and builds correctly. And we made some changes, so it might not even build correctly, but yeah, so you can see we've got an error here. So cannot find payment intent on line 76. So if we go to line 76, there you go. This should be subscription because we forgot to change that piece. So we can go and try to run Firebase deploy. Long story short, what this will do is this will upload our cloud functions, or the functions that we just discussed. You can see get customer here. It's probably a little bit hard to read. Create subscription, create payment method. And then it's got timeouts associated with it. And if we wanted to debug it, we could view logs just for this function, or we could view logs for all our functions up here. But let's say we just want to check our get customer logs. We can click there, and this will give us all the logs for the calls to our get customer function. The other thing it'll tell you is it's an HTTP trigger, so it's a cloud HTTPS request, which is really like an arbitrary REST API that is hosted by Firebase Cloud Functions. And you can see that that was the only issue from a syntax perspective that we had. There could be logic issues in here that wouldn't catch. And so right now what it's doing is it's uploading our changes, and within a few seconds they'll be reflected here. The names are the same, but the response, some of the variable names were changed. So that's kind of a brief walkthrough of this Firebase Cloud Function project. This was created to integrate with Stripe, and it's working. I'll show you it working in another project, and here's the repo. I'll put that in the description, and thank you guys for watching. hopefully be able to get that other video up sometime this week. Please let me know if there's any questions that you have or anything else you'd like me to go through. Thank you.